The classified file's internal after-action reports and procurement logs were supposed to stay buried. Captain Reyes of the 7th Logistics Battalion knew that exposing them would likely end her career, but she couldn't ignore what she'd uncovered. A pattern of falsified records pointing directly to her own commanding officers. When she submitted her findings through official channels, the evidence vanished from the system overnight. The next morning, transfer orders appeared on her desk. The hearing room filled with officers who seemed to have already decided her fate. Then Admiral Carter walked in unannounced, carrying a folder stamped with the highest clearance. "Where are you tuning in from today?" Sometimes, one officer's refusal to look away sets everything in motion. The first sign of trouble appeared during a routine quarterly audit of the 7th Logistics Battalion's supply records. Captain Reyes noticed an irregularity. Several cases of night vision equipment were listed as shipped to Forward Operating Base Hammer, but Hammer's inventory logs didn't show them as received. Initially, she suspected a paperwork delay or a minor clerical error, then she reviewed the fuel distribution logs. One entry stood out. The Thread Transport Company's records documented a substantial fuel shipment to a base that no longer existed on official maps. The digital requisition forms had all the correct authorization codes and signatures from Colonel Mears's office. Everything in the system looked flawless, yet the supplies were being routed to places that didn't exist. Reyes started cross-referencing 3 months of supply manifests against the actual inventories at each base. A significant portion of high-value equipment and fuel shipments were consistently marked as delivered to these ghost locations. The digital trails traced back to a familiar cluster of authorization officers in the 14th Support Command. Among them was Major Haskins, who had signed Reyes' last evaluation report. The system was designed to automatically flag discrepancies exceeding a certain threshold, but these shipments always fell just below that mark. Whoever orchestrated the scheme clearly understood the audit protocols and knew how to remain undetected. Digging deeper, Reyes used her security clearance to examine the entire procurement chain. She found matching invoices from defense contractors for each of the phantom shipments, with payments routed to bank accounts registered to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Late one night in the secure records room, she uncovered a maintenance log for a cargo helicopter. It showed an unscheduled stop at a civilian airfield in Kuwait on the same date as one of the questionable fuel shipments. The pilot had listed the detour as a mechanical inspection, but the airfield had no maintenance facilities. Satellite imagery from that day revealed 3 fuel trucks waiting as the helicopter landed. Reyes compiled her findings into a detailed report, attaching dozens of supporting documents. The evidence implicated at least 7 senior officers across 3 commands. Each case followed the same pattern: legitimate requisitions, altered after approval, rerouted shipments, and falsified delivery confirmations. The operation was too coordinated to be simple graft. It was systematic. Military auditors later confirmed that Reyes had uncovered a sophisticated version of the phantom shipment fraud model. The perpetrators had exploited a vulnerability in the verification process. While destination bases routinely confirmed deliveries, no one cross-checked whether those bases were still active or even existed. Reyes discovered this gap only after she began comparing logistics data with updated geographic records. The day after she submitted her preliminary findings, her commanding officer called her in. "Good work catching those discrepancies," he said, eyes averted. "We'll handle it through command channels." By that afternoon, the paper copy of her report was gone from her desk. When she tried to access the digital file, an error message appeared: "File corrupted, unable to retrieve." This was her first indication that reporting the truth would not be straightforward. On late Tuesday morning, Captain Reyes submitted her report through the Inspector General's secure portal, following the protocol outlined in AR 21. The system generated a standard confirmation receipt, which she printed for her records and handed to her supervisor, Major Connors. By Thursday, when she checked the tracking reference, the portal returned a file not found error. Connors insisted the report had been automatically rerouted to internal audit teams. "Happens all the time with supply chain issues," he said, keeping his gaze fixed on his monitor. When Reyes asked for the official reassignment memo, Connors produced a printed email that lacked the required authentication headers. The shared drive where she had stored her supporting documents now showed modification dates from 2 weeks before she uploaded anything. At the base IG office, Reyes found no record of her submission. The sergeant at the desk checked several systems and shrugged. Must have hit a glitch during last week's server migration. But the IT bulletin board behind him listed the migration as having taken place months earlier. 17 days after her report vanished, Reyes was notified of an unscheduled security clearance reinvestigation. Special Agent Kohler from OSI appeared at her unit, asking her co-workers about her stability and attention to detail. The questions were pointed, and as Reyes watched her colleagues return from the interviews, she noticed their uneasy glances and lowered voices. The focus was not on her job performance, but on whether she showed paranoid tendencies or fixation on trivial matters. Her daily work life changed without warning. Access to the logistics database now required secondary approval from Colonel Mears's office. 3 of her closest contacts in procurement were abruptly transferred to distant assignments: Alaska, Germany, South Korea within days of each other. When Reyes attempted to email a former colleague about missing shipment records, her message bounced back with a restriction notice. A 2018 GAO report found that 63% of service members who reported fraud experienced some form of bureaucratic retaliation. The most common tactics included sudden clearance reviews, unexplained changes to system access, and isolation from colleagues. In 42% of substantiated cases, digital evidence vanished under the pretense of administrative error. One morning, Reyes found the navigation system in her assigned Humvee wiped clean. All her saved locations and recent destinations were missing, but the maintenance log listed no work orders. That afternoon, base transportation reassigned her vehicle for scheduled maintenance, replacing it with a decade-old truck with a broken odometer. When Reyes tried to escalate her report through external channels, the pattern continued. After she mailed encrypted copies of her evidence to the Pentagon IG, the package disappeared without a trace. Her follow-up email to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service returned an auto-reply stating the recipient was no longer at this address, even though the agent was still listed as active duty in the directory. Security footage from the records room where she'd stored backup files was corrupted for the exact 48-hour window when her cabinet was accessed. The logbook for that day was blank, though she had signed in for every previous visit. At the end of the month, Reyes received transfer orders to a public affairs unit in Guam, dead-end assignment unrelated to her experience. The notice cited operational needs, despite the presence of several junior officers with less seniority. When she challenged the decision, personnel cited her pending security review as the reason. Her final attempt was a personal visit to the Air Force OSI detachment at a nearby joint base, carrying physical evidence. She was turned away at the gate due to new access restrictions, and the investigator she'd contacted never returned her calls. That evening, 3 tires on her car were slashed in the commissary parking lot. The security camera that covered that section had been pointed skyward for a week. On paper, military whistleblower protections prohibit retaliation. In practice, Reyes encountered the same bureaucratic obstacles and plausible deniability that mark so many cases. Each action could be explained away as routine. Only the accumulation of these events revealed the pattern. As the weeks passed, she noticed something else. The spaces around her began to shift. Isolation in the military rarely arrives with a single act. It begins quietly, with small shifts in routine. Reyes noticed colleagues leaving empty chairs between themselves and her in the mess hall. Officers who once shared inside jokes now nodded without stopping. At unit gatherings, she stood on the edge of conversations that faded as she approached. Invitations to after-hours events stopped coming. She ate alone. Professional opportunities dried up just as quickly. The monthly tactical analysis seminar went ahead without her, no invitation, no explanation. When she arrived anyway, the registrar told her the seating chart had changed. Her name disappeared from the distribution list for the weekly operations bulletin, and key updates reached her only after decisions had already been made. Training assignments and chances to join new projects went to others with less experience. Each omission sent a clear message. Technical barriers crept in next. Her access to the logistics database failed at critical moments, especially when she tried to retrieve records for audits. Calendar reminders for briefings never sent, and teams arrived late, blaming missed notifications. IT support logged her tickets, but left them open for weeks. Other officers used the same systems without issue. The problems seemed to target only her. Anonymous complaints appeared in her file, each more vague than the last. One accused her of being abrasive with junior enlisted during an inventory. Another questioned her judgment under pressure, though no event was named. A third cited a lack of commitment to unit cohesion. No investigations followed, but the notes remained, casting a shadow over her record. When Reyes requested a transfer to the 3rd Military Intelligence Battalion, the memo came back denied her, pending administrative review cited, though no proceedings existed. Her supervisor refused to endorse any further transfer packets, claiming ongoing concerns about her professional demeanor. Everyday tasks became harder. Equipment requests required extra paperwork, which was often misplaced or delayed. Uniform alterations and mail deliveries took weeks longer than for anyone else. Her training certification lapsed when the testing system crashed repeatedly during her exam. Without it, she was barred from field exercises. Gym reservations and running trail access always seemed blocked during her usual times, though the facility sat unused. Social connections eroded. Over several weeks, colleagues unfriended her on social media. Group chats for the unit continued without her. Event invitations were sent to an outdated email address. She found herself outside every loop, both online and off. Her leave requests met endless delays. Thanksgiving plans were denied for manning shortages, even as others departed for the holiday. The pattern repeated for every subsequent request. Counseling sessions with the battalion commander now included vague references to her adjustment to unit culture and opportunities for growth in teamwork, despite her technical skills being praised. The criticism never named specific incidents, only a general sense she didn't fit. By the 4th month, every process from supply orders to personnel paperwork required extra steps or faced unexplained setbacks. Nothing was explicitly blocked, but every path forward became more difficult. The system didn't force her out, it wore her down, making each day a test of endurance. Historical records from the 1944 Truman Committee revealed that officers who reported procurement fraud faced similar campaigns of isolation, subtle, persistent, and designed to sap their resolve. For Reyes, the effect was cumulative. The more she tried to push through, the more apparent it became that someone wanted her isolated, uncertain, and alone. That atmosphere of exclusion set the stage for what came next. Major Chen's presence at the Wednesday logistics briefing was unexpected. He took a seat near the back, an officer from another command who had no clear reason to be following Reyes' supply audits. When Reyes presented her quarterly fuel expenditure report, Chen waited until the end before raising a question. He asked why verification protocols failed to cross-check depot records against available aerial surveillance. The question was precise, technical, and cut directly to the vulnerabilities Reyes had uncovered in the phantom shipment scheme. The room went quiet for a moment, and Reyes registered that someone else understood the gap she'd been tracking. A few days later, during a routine motor pool inspection, Chen approached Reyes as she reviewed maintenance logs. He leaned over a clipboard, voice low. "This rotorblade serial number was logged as destroyed in Afghanistan," he said, eyes on the paperwork. The statement was offhand, but the implication was clear. He recognized the patterns of equipment diversion and knew how to spot the subtle markers. Their collaboration developed in cautious increments. Reyes began leaving flagged reports in a secure document shredding bin, an area rarely monitored by auditors. Chen retrieved them within hours, always careful not to draw attention. In return, he slipped notes into the folded maps Reyes carried on field exercises. These notes contained shipping manifest numbers, contractor codes, and references to bases that didn't appear in standard directories. The exchanges were brief and never acknowledged in public. They relied on established tradecraft, using overlooked corners of routine logistics to pass information without leaving a digital trace. Studies on institutional whistleblowing have documented similar methods, using procedural blind spots to create safe channels for sharing sensitive material. Chen's access filled critical gaps in Reyes' investigation. He provided shipping manifests that had been purged from her system access, including records of Bradley fighting vehicles routed to a depot that didn't service armor, and night vision goggles sent to a marine facility with no use for them. Each document carried the same cluster of authorizations Reyes had already flagged. Together, they mapped out the scope of the operation shipments rerouted through defunct bases, authentication stamps replicated across commands, and payments funneled to shell companies overseas. Then, in late October, Chen vanished. He stopped appearing at briefings, and his name was removed from the staff duty roster. Reyes found a final note tucked into a training manual in the base library coordinates, a date, and a brief message that referenced their case files. She checked the personnel database and found a record of Chen on temporary duty in Central Asia, but the assignment didn't exist in any official orders. When Reyes tried to contact him, her messages bounced back, and mail sent to his forwarding address was returned unopened. The last audit report filed under Chen's name showed signs of tampering, paragraphs misaligned, font changes, and redactions that didn't match the original draft. The official version praised a vendor that Chen's drafts had flagged for suspicious payments. The base's cleaning staff changed overnight. Reyes noticed her office trash emptied twice daily, and unfamiliar faces in new uniforms passed through her workspace. Base police ran her license plates repeatedly, citing random checks. The pattern was clear. Someone was watching more closely now. A junior accounting clerk, someone Reyes had quietly mentored, slipped her a note during inventory. Chen's family got emergency orders to Germany. They left yesterday. The handwriting was shaky, the message brief, but the numbers matched the case files Chen had referenced in their last exchange. With Chen gone, Reyes understood that the operation wasn't just about paperwork. Equipment and money were moving off the books, and she was now the only person left who could prove it. The next step would require more than quiet collaboration. It would mean taking a risk that couldn't be undone. Submitting a formal complaint to the Defense Department Inspector General required precision. Reyes waited for the pre-dawn lull, choosing a secure terminal in the printing room isolated from the main base network. The IG submission process demanded layer after layer of authentication: her access card, a rotating code from her token, and multiple password prompts. She printed out copies for the IG, her own records, and a third to store off-site, careful to leave no trace on the local drive. By mid-morning, 2 military police officers arrived at her office without warning. They said they were conducting a routine check, but their focus was her workstation. Without explanation, they disconnected her computer and carried it away. Reyes watched the screen go dark, aware that her access to evidence and communication had just been cut off. Minutes later, a base security officer appeared with a signed order authorizing the seizure of her terminal as potential evidence. The regulation cited was generic, its language vague. At the biometric checkpoint outside the skiff, Reyes' ID was suddenly flagged for additional verification. The guard's tone remained neutral, but the message was clear. Her access was suspended. Lieutenant Colonel Sims arrived with 2 armed escorts. As they walked her down the corridor, Reyes kept her expression steady, but her thoughts raced. She knew this was not about protocol, it was about control. The escort was silent, their presence a warning to anyone watching. The official hearing notice arrived the next afternoon. It referenced alleged violations of classified material handling standards, but made no mention of her IG complaint. The hearing was scheduled for early morning in a seldom-used basement room, a location chosen for its isolation. The timing on a training holiday meant few would witness what happened. In the hours before the hearing, Reyes gathered everything she had: off-site backups of deleted reports, notarized statements from colleagues now stationed overseas, shipping manifests obtained through months of requests. The folders she carried felt heavier than usual, the paper trail both shield and burden. When she entered the hearing room, the setup was unmistakably designed to keep her isolated. There were no seats for observers. Electrical outlets near the witness chair didn't work, making it impossible to display digital evidence. The panel arrived on schedule: an inspector general representative, a security officer, and a JAG attorney. None made eye contact beyond the required formalities. As proceedings began, Reyes noted the ways the hearing diverged from standard JAG procedures. The court reporter insisted on dictation rather than accepting her prepared index, slowing the process and drawing attention to each document. When Reyes tried to link her actions to the fraud investigation, the panel cut her off, refocusing on procedural details. Why had she stored backup copies off-site? Did she follow every step for logging out of the skiff? The substance of her complaint was never addressed. It became clear the hearing was not about resolving her allegations. The questions circled around her conduct, not the evidence she brought. Each objection she made was recorded, but the panel showed no interest in the missing reports or altered audit files. Instead, they pressed her on minor administrative choices, hinting at negligence and lack of cooperation. When the session ended, Reyes was told to surrender all classified material and report daily for accountability checks. Her base access remained restricted. As she left the basement, two unfamiliar officers stood in the hallway, their uniforms marked with Defense Criminal Investigative Service insignia. They watched her without speaking, a silent signal that the process was far from over. The next phase would unfold in a room stripped of windows, under the gaze of officers whose names she already recognized from the documents she'd tried to protect. Inside the hearing room, the setup was unmistakably deliberate. Officers filled the panel, their uniforms pressed and nameplates aligned, but what stood out most was the presence of Colonel Mears at the head of the table. Reyes noted, with a jolt of recognition, that Mears was not only named in her original report, but now presided over the proceedings, a clear breach of impartiality. Several other officers she'd implicated in her findings sat nearby, their faces unreadable. The arrangement left little doubt about the panel's intent. The session began with questions that skirted the real issue. Rather than addressing the logistics fraud, the panel fixated on a single, vaguely critical remark from an old fitness evaluation in Reyes' file. Out of her entire service record, they chose the one document that hinted at interpersonal challenges, ignoring years of exemplary performance. The pattern was familiar. Tribunals often seize on isolated negative comments to cast doubt, sidestepping the broader context. When Reyes tried to submit satellite images showing unauthorized transfers at the Kuwait airfield, Colonel Mears interrupted. He declared the evidence classified at a level above her current clearance and blocked discussion. The official process required the panel to either declassify relevant material or move the hearing to a secure facility, but neither option was considered. Reyes noticed that the document number on Mears's folder matched unclassified logistics files, not any restricted intelligence report. The court reporter switched on her machine only when Reyes was being questioned, not when she presented her own evidence. Each time she raised issues about fuel invoices or missing equipment, the transcript captured only the panel's responses. This selective recording left critical gaps in the official record, a tactic sometimes used to control the narrative of contentious hearings. As the morning wore on, the temperature in the room climbed steadily. The HVAC system pumped in hot air, raising the heat to an oppressive level-known intimidation tactic in high-stakes proceedings. Reyes watched as panel members loosened their collars, but no one acknowledged the discomfort or suggested a break. Requests for basic procedural fairness were dismissed. When Reyes asked for the chain of custody log for her confiscated hard drives, Major Carter replied that such records were unnecessary for this inquiry, sidestepping standard military justice requirements. The panel moved quickly, skipping over most of the procedural steps meant to protect whistleblowers. No witnesses were allowed. Each time Reyes tried to return to the missing shipments, the subject changed abruptly. She was asked to recite dates and service numbers from memory, without access to her notes. The pressure built in subtle ways. At one point, Colonel Drescher accused Reyes of unauthorized contact with foreign nationals, citing her correspondence with a German logistics officer during a NATO exercise. What had been routine Allied coordination was reframed as a security violation. The panel's questions became more pointed, shifting from process to implication. The physical environment added to the strain. Diesel fumes drifted in through the ventilation system, causing headaches and making it difficult to concentrate. Panel members occasionally excused themselves for air, but Reyes was expected to remain at the table. Her written statement vanished from the evidence pile during a short recess. The sergeant-at-arms claimed it had been misplaced in routine cleaning, but security logs showed no staff entered the room overnight. No one offered to search for it or replace it. The missing document joined a growing list of irregularities, each one minor in isolation, but together forming a clear pattern. The hearing ended without resolution. When Reyes referenced whistleblower protections, Colonel Mears simply called for a recess, leaving the outcome suspended in procedural limbo. As she gathered her things, she noticed new security cameras installed above her seat, their indicator lights dark. The panel lingered, speaking in low voices. Reyes stepped into the hallway, aware that the next interruption could change everything. Colonel Mears' voice faltered mid-sentence as the door swung open with a metallic groan. Conversation stopped. Uniformed officers straightened instinctively, sensing the shift before anyone spoke. Admiral Carter entered in full dress, the ribbons and 4 stars on his shoulder unmistakable. 2 JAG officers followed, each carrying sealed evidence boxes. The atmosphere changed. No one needed to be told who now held authority in the room. Carter moved directly to Reyes. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, a gesture that broke every formality, yet left the room silent. Her heart pounded as she realized, maybe for the first time since this began, that she was no longer alone. Carter addressed the panel without raising his voice. "These proceedings are now under my authority." He set a red-banded folder in front of Colonel Mears, whose hands shook as he opened it. The panel's confidence drained away. Carter's orders, signed and stamped, left no ambiguity. He invoked his prerogative as a flag officer to assume control of the hearing, citing national security implications. The JAG officers began unpacking evidence with practiced efficiency. Instead of a parade of exhibit numbers, Carter focused on what mattered: key forensic accounting reports, recent satellite imagery, and notarized statements. Each document was supported by metadata freshly pulled from secure systems and live satellite feeds, details that left little room for denial. Carter's delivery was methodical. He pointed out duplicate authorization codes Reyes had flagged months earlier, then referenced surveillance photos showing unauthorized transfers at overseas depots. He highlighted a notarized statement from Major Chen, dated days before his transfer, confirming the pattern Reyes had uncovered. The evidence linked missing equipment, altered records, and coordinated cover-ups. As Carter spoke, the panelists' posture shifted, notes vanished from the table, and the room's earlier certainty dissolved. The Admiral activated a secure monitor in the corner. Footage appeared: a warehouse overseas, crates marked with property tags from Reyes's audits, time-stamped within hours of the hearing. A tactical team moved through the aisles, scanning barcodes that matched missing inventory. The implication was clear: this wasn't theoretical fraud. It was happening in real time, and now there was proof. Carter produced Reyes's original IG complaint, the unaltered file with intact metadata. He traced every unauthorized access each time someone in the 14th Support Command's executive office viewed the report. Another piece of evidence disappeared. The pattern was undeniable. The panel sat at attention, no longer willing to meet anyone's gaze. By noon, several officers excused themselves without explanation. Carter declared Reyes's original fraud complaint substantiated and actionable. He suspended 6 officers pending investigation, including 3 who had sat in judgment of Reyes only hours before. The shift in authority was absolute. As Carter prepared to leave, Reyes noticed a tremor in his hand as he reached for his cover. It was not a sign of uncertainty, but of controlled anger. The intervention was not just about protocol. It was personal, and it marked the moment when the case and Reyes's fate changed direction. The evidence boxes remained on the table, their contents about to reshape every assumption the panel had held. Carter began with the financial evidence. The first folder contained offshore bank records, each page stamped with wire transfers routed through accounts registered to shell companies. Forensic accountants had traced the payments from 3 defense contractors to personal accounts belonging to Colonel Mears and 2 other officers present at the hearing. The transfers matched dates when falsified supply manifests were approved in the logistics system. Each transaction was carefully structured to avoid triggering automatic audits, a method familiar to investigators of military procurement fraud. The pattern was clear money moved quietly, and always in tandem with paperwork that hid the true destination of supplies. The secure monitor displayed satellite imagery, captured just as the hearing started. Carter's team had coordinated simultaneous operations, and the footage showed warehouses outside Manamount listed in any official inventory. Thermal scans revealed rows of crates, their serial numbers matching equipment from Reyes's missing asset reports. The images were recent, some less than an hour old. One frame showed Humvees parked beside a hangar at the Kuwaiti airfield Reyes had flagged months earlier. The evidence didn't stop at hardware. Surveillance photos, time-stamped and geotagged, showed Colonel Drescher meeting a defense contractor in Dubai on a day his official travel orders placed him at a training exercise in Texas. Internal memos followed. Carter laid out a printed email chain between Mears and the deputy commander, where Reyes' name appeared under the heading Containment Priority 1. Another discussed reallocation protocols for her audit team. The language was clinical but unmistakable, echoing phrases from declassified manuals on isolating whistleblowers. Forensic analysts had recovered these documents from backup servers, their metadata showing numerous attempts to erase or sanitize their content. The memos did not just reveal a cover-up, they outlined a deliberate campaign to discredit and sideline anyone who threatened the operation. Next came the digital trail. Carter's investigators reconstructed Reyes' original IG report using data fragments left in printer memory. Timestamps proved she had filed her complaint before the disappearance of her records. System logs showed repeated unauthorized access from the 14th Support Command's executive office, always during shifts with minimal oversight. One entry listed Colonel Drescher's credentials accessing the file minutes before Reyes' security clearance was suspended. The sequence of events left little doubt about intent. The most detailed evidence was a ledger recovered from a contractor's laptop. It listed kickback percentages for equipment and services, with handwritten notes matching samples from 3 officers' correspondence. Each entry referenced authorization numbers that appeared in Reyes's audit spreadsheets, tying the fraud directly to manipulated supply records. The ledger mapped out the mechanics: fake requisitions, altered post-approval, shipments rerouted, and profits split between contractors and military contacts. Military forensic accountants later identified the operation's full scope. Fake requests used legitimate codes, altered after approval to redirect shipments. Contractors invoiced for full delivery while splitting the value of diverted assets. Satellite imagery confirmed more than 14 million in equipment moved through unauthorized warehouses over 18 months. Standard audits showed high compliance, but the real story was in the anomalies Reyes had documented. Carter's team had acted while the panel convened. The warehouse footage was not archival, it was a live feed from an ongoing seizure. Agents moved through the aisles, reading off serial numbers that matched Reyes' spreadsheets. Her work had provided the roadmap for the operation's unraveling. The financial trail extended beyond the officers in the room. Larger sums flowed to accounts linked to a retired senior officer's consulting firm, a pattern seen in other cases where illicit gains funded post-service careers. The consulting firm had secured millions in contracts from the same companies involved in the fraud, revealing a broader network of complicity. As Carter presented each piece, the panel's composure eroded. Officers who had once controlled the narrative now avoided each other's eyes. The court reporter, silent for most of the morning, now documented every word. The system that had insulated itself with protocol and secrecy was exposed, its defenses stripped away by evidence too detailed to dismiss. Carter concluded with a personnel file: Reyes' original performance review, marked exceptional and recommending promotion, overwritten in the system minutes after her first IG complaint. The alteration was not an error but a calculated move to undermine her credibility. The hearing ended in silence, the weight of the evidence settling over the room. What followed would not be decided by whispers or closed-door meetings, but by formal orders and public accountability. 10. The aftermath. The days after the hearing brought a shift in the landscape. Media outlets noted that the convictions of Colonel Mears and 3 others marked one of the rare instances where high-ranking officers faced prosecution for supply chain fraud based on documentary evidence. Reyes's audit spreadsheets became central to the cases, their formulas dissected by legal teams who found them more reliable than any verbal testimony. The court-martial notices arrived quickly, each one naming officers whose signatures had appeared time and again on the falsified records. Within weeks, the Pentagon announced new logistics protocols shaped by Reyes's findings. Dual verification from separate battalions became mandatory for large shipments, and satellite spot checks were instituted for a percentage of overseas deliveries. In the first quarter after these changes, inventory shrink dropped by 38%. Defense Department memos credited the overhaul to the loopholes Reyes had documented, and the reforms spread to 3 branches before the year was out. Reyes' security clearance was restored with a formal commendation for integrity, but the recognition came with a cost. Her personnel file carried an unofficial marker controversial case, subject to review that surfaced in background checks and quietly influenced her prospects. Mentoring calls from former superiors stopped. Invitations to unit gatherings and professional networks went silent. When the next promotion cycle came, her name was missing from informal shortlists, and a single War College application disappeared without explanation. The pattern was familiar to anyone who had stepped outside the lines, and it left her professional network thinner than before. General Carter offered her a lead analyst role on his new anti-corruption task force. The position came with a promotion and the promise of direct influence over future reforms. Reyes declined in writing, stating a preference for operational assignments. She transferred to the 10th Mountain Division as a battalion intelligence officer, trading Pentagon corridors for muddy roads and field tents. Her skills found new purpose, training infantry units to spot irregularities in supply routes and teaching junior officers to read between the lines of a manifest. Requests for her briefings grew, especially after she identified a pattern in convoy losses that others had missed. The reforms she inspired made large-scale fraud more difficult, but the system adapted. Investigators soon found new shell companies in other jurisdictions, and payment trails shifted to more complex digital channels. The underlying culture proved harder to change than the protocols themselves. Reyes watched as oversight committees debated new technologies, hoping to keep pace with evolving schemes. She kept her routines simple. Duplicate copies of reports stayed locked in her footlocker. She avoided authorization codes linked to her old command, regardless of who now held those offices. In briefings, she studied not just the data on the screen, but the reactions of those in the room. News of further indictments reached her through official bulletins, but she rarely read the details. Her attention turned to practical matter-shelping platoons prepare for the unexpected, showing new lieutenants how to verify a shipment and building systems where accountability ran sideways as well as up the chain. The impact of her actions lingered in small ways. A checklist circulated among supply clerks, a protocol adopted by another battalion, a private thanking her for a tip that saved a convoy. The system had changed, but not entirely. The culture, she realized, would need more than new rules to shift. It was only later, in a quieter setting far from the hearing room, that the personal cost of her decisions became clear. Some costs never appear in official records. Reyes spotted them in the quiet routines that came after the headlines faded. In the motor pool, a private first class hunched over deployment manifests, cross-referencing equipment lists against personnel rosters. His process was slow, his notes scattered, but he was looking for patterns, trying to do what she had done, in his own way. Reyes handed him the red pen checklist she'd carried since her first audit, watching him study the annotations. The form had been copied so many times the letters blurred, but its purpose endured. "Heard this came from some big investigation," the private said, not looking up. Reyes nodded, letting the moment stand. Legacy in the military often passes this way quietly, hand to hand, without ceremony. Later, in the VFW hall, Reyes recognized Colonel Drescher's silhouette at the bar. His jacket was stripped of insignia, the mark of a dishonorable discharge. No prison sentence, just a lost pension and a permanent ban typical for officers caught in first-time procurement fraud. Drescher didn't turn as she sat nearby. "You cost me millions," he said, voice dull. He traced the rim of his glass. "They just hired smarter accountants. The Bahrain warehouse? Same containers, new company." His words carried no anger, only exhaustion. The system, he implied, had learned to adapt faster than its watchdogs. Reyes ordered coffee, forcing an awkward pause as the bartender searched for filters. The ritual gave her a moment to consider what had changed and what hadn't. The reforms she'd helped implement made some forms of fraud harder, but new schemes appeared in their place. Defense analytics showed a sharp drop in large-scale theft, but a rise in smaller, more agile scams. Each week, her inbox filled with case alerts amounts just low enough to slip past the new safeguards. The criminals had adjusted, studying the very protocols meant to stop them. Her personnel file, restored after the investigation, now carried a quiet sensitivity alert. It didn't block her outright, but it lingered in background checks. A subtle reminder that she had once made herself a problem for the system. Promotion boards passed over her name. Invitations to professional gatherings dwindled. Former colleagues grew distant. The cost of integrity, she realized, was rarely paid all at once. It arrived in increments, lost opportunities, strained friendships, a sense of being set apart. On nights when the base was quiet, Reyes reviewed the outcomes of the court-martials. Some officers declared bankruptcy, others resurfaced as consultants. One company rebranded and won new contracts, the same assets under a different name. The patterns repeated, names changed, but the incentives endured. Research from the Naval War College confirmed what she saw: first-hand systems of corruption rebuild quickly, adapting to new oversight just as bacteria adapt to new antibiotics. Yet the work mattered. Protocols she designed became standard. Junior officers learned to question what didn't add up. A checklist, a conversation, a single moment of mentorship could shift the odds for someone else. The cost of doing the right thing was real, but so was the impact. Reyes understood that the system counted on people staying quiet. She had chosen otherwise, and that choice shaped everything that followed. Bureaucracies thrive on quiet compliance. Captain Reyes' decision to act, despite the risks, demonstrates that one person's refusal to look away can alter the entire course of an institution. The oath is to truth, not to comfort or convenience. If you've ever faced a choice like Reyes, share your story below to inspire others. Real reform begins when individuals decide that moral courage outweighs the cost. Those revised audit protocols, the junior officers double-checking manifests, these are the quiet, lasting changes that ripple through the ranks. For military women and anyone in uniform, remember, moral courage can reshape even the most entrenched systems. Subscribe for more stories of integrity and service.